Hello, welcome to the Wicked Engine devlog for 2025 September. Hopefully this recording will work after so many failed attempts with different software. Okay, so what have I done in Wicked Engine after the last devlog? What I want to show today is the new animation importer for the character, the humanoid components. Previously, you had to select an animation and use retarget to a humanoid. With that, you had to do it one by one for each animation, and then if the animation also contained models and that kind of stuff, those needed to be deleted. So with the new one, you select the character, the humanoid component settings, the import animations button will open the file open dialog. I'm not sure that it will be shown on this recording software or not, so I'm just explaining it beforehand. You open that, you can select multiple files from that, because now the file open dialog supports multi-select as well. Those files can be FBX, GLTF or WI scene. They can control models and animations, but only the animations will be imported from them and parented under this humanoid character. I have a sword and shield pack that I downloaded from Mixamo with several animation files in FBX. I select all of them and open them. When the opening is complete, the animation tester drop-down menu will display all the animations that you imported. If you didn't import animations, but you still had animations parented to the character model, then those will be also shown here. So if I select an animation from here, it will be immediately played for the character. You can also select the none. That will stop the animation and return the character to original pose. You can select another animation and another one. The previously played animation will be stopped and the current one will be played. Let's select one of the idle ones for now. Okay, for example, this one. So another thing is the arm spacing and leg spacing for the character. You can control with the arm spacing the spacing of the arms compared to the body, and with the legs spacing between the legs. With these sliders you can override the animations slightly, and I think this could be useful for multiple characters using the same animations, but they can be slightly modified. For example, a fat character would walk with a greater leg spacing or an arm spacing, for example. This can also be controlled from the script very easily. Speaking of scripts, in the character controller script, I will show a new feature which is called the dedicated character shadows. Now on the main character that you control, dedicated shadows will appear, which means more shadows with greater resolutions occupying a smaller space, so the shadows will just be sharper on the character as a result. On the other character, which is not the player, I didn't enable the dedicated character shadows, so shadows on that are just blurry. The dedicated character shadow also shows up on other objects that the character casts shadows from, and everything nearby the character as well. For example, the grass shadow is also sharper in that small area around the character. If I move closer to a non-player character, the dedicated shadow that is fit around the character, which is just a shadow cascade of the directional light. You can't control that from the light settings, but it is something that gets automatically added by the rendering system just when you enable the character dedicated shadows. And as you can see, right now the non-player character has also sharp shadows. If I move away from it, it will have blurry shadows, but on my character the shadows are always this sharp. Also, take a look at this. I didn't move close enough for the NPC to have the sharp shadows casted from myself. It has blurry shadows, but when I enter conversation mode, then it will also have the dedicated shadows for itself enabled. So yes, that's about it. On a previous video I shown this as already, but without talking, and a slight issue was visible in that video. When the character was in grass, then it appeared that the grass was lighter around the character. That happened because the grass detail was really high in the dedicated shadow, and that made the grass shadow appear lighter, because the grass was much thinner in that shadow. To fix that issue, I just slightly reduced the grass detail in the dedicated shadow to appear more thick by just reducing the sampler mipmap BS. So that was an easy fix, and fortunately it worked out alright. So this is it for the character dedicated shadow. To check out how that works, just check out the character controller Lua script and search for the keyword dedicated. You will immediately find that how to enable that in the script. So another thing is that I added a new rendering effect called the mesh blending. I will close this scene now, and I open my mesh blend test scene, which is a modified version of the first person samples island scene. I have the mesh blending enabled on the rocks here, and different objects as well. Okay, so let's see how to enable that. You select the rock. In the material settings, you will find the mesh blend slider. If you set it to 0, then the mesh blend is disabled. But first, let me disable also this editor outline effect. In the general options, you can now disable it under the outline opacity. I will set this to 0 right now, just so the editor outline doesn't interfere with doesn't interfere with the effect on the edges. So the mesh blend is disabled for this rock. The intersection with the terrain is pretty sharp and unnatural looking. With the mesh blend slider, you can easily enable this mesh blend effect, which is a post-process effect. If you increase it above 0, then that means the fall off on the mesh blend is increased. But in 0 it's completely disabled. When you increase it, it's enabled, and you can control the fall off with the slider. The fall off means the effect's fall off will be reduced by the distance, the pixel distance, the pixel's world space distance from the edge that it finds. The fall off also controls the kind of the cutout on the silhouettes of objects. Since this is a screen space effect, the greater mesh blend can cause greater visible issues. To see that, you can, for example, you can see these issues. These are because this is a post-process and multiple edges are found here and things like that. If I reduce this I can reduce the errors considerably. I would usually use this effect only in with a small blend factor, but you can also use it in a larger one if you feel like it, and on some other objects it might work better. Another issue is because it's screen space. Take a look at the bottom of the screen. When the edges reach the bottom of the screen, the effect disappears. This is also much more visible if you use a large mesh blend radius or mesh blend factor. Another issue is behind objects. For example, that black rock has mesh blend enabled on it. And the screen space nature of the effect doesn't allow that correctly doesn't allow the foreground rock to blend with the background rock, because the distance, even though there is an edge between them, the distance is larger than the allowed threshold. The allowed threshold can be usually modified between 0 and 2, but if you need it, you can modify it up to 10 by just writing 10 here. I'm able to modify it up to 10. But this will also greatly increase the fall off, which will result in issues. And it can also result in this halo effect, because when the distance fall off gets too large, so silhouette edges doesn't get cut off as much. So I would use it pretty carefully right now. So what's the benefit? What's the real benefit of this? Is that you can achieve a more natural looking transition between the rock and the ground. You might think that, yeah, right, in the FPS sample you already seen something like this. Let's disable the mesh blend and enable the material blend, the terrain blend effect for the rock. The terrain blend effect is controlled with the terrain blend slider. This is a different effect, it's not screen space. It's much more stable, no problem if the rock goes out, the edges goes out of the screen. And it can have a much larger fall off, not even capped to anything. You can set this to anything. But the rock in this way can only blend with the terrain and not other objects. For example, let's move it close to the tree. And it doesn't blend at all with the tree, unfortunately, like this. Or the vegetation, only with the terrain. And you can also see a sharp cutoff still remaining visible between the terrain and the rock. This is because the shading cannot be as smoothly blended between the two things with this effect. Let's switch back to, you can also combine the mesh blend effect with the terrain blend effect, but for now let's switch back to the regular shader and only use the mesh blend. So with the mesh blend enabled, the transition between the terrain and the rock is smoother, and it's also possible now to transition between the trees and animated any other object basically, and smoothly blend between them. This is pretty good if you want to blend between multiple rocks, for example. You can have pretty nice transitions like this. The effect can also be completely disabled from the graphics options by this mesh blend checkbox. And you can see with disabled, it's quite unnatural looking to have a very sharp edge between the black and the other rocks, the black rock and the other like sandy rocks. If I enable it, the transition becomes quite nice, but with some screen space issues visible at some points. That can be reduced by reducing the mesh blend factor to pretty thin blend region. The mesh blend factor on this is pretty thin, but between the two rocks is pretty large still, because this rock uses a larger blend factor, and between the transitions the maximum factor will be chosen between two objects. Even if I disable the blending on this black rock, it is still choosing to blend with the other rocks, but not with the terrain, because between these two, none of them have mesh blend enabled. Between these two rocks, one of them have it, so the blend will appear. This effect does not need temporal anti-aliasing to work, but you can see with large blend factors a bit of an issue when the factor gets larger. This kind of UV mirroring trick starts to display some problems. Well, temporal anti-aliasing is not required for this effect, but you can enable it and the transition will be smoothed a bit. Some flickering might appear. Again, this is largely improved with a smaller blend radius. And with temporal anti-aliasing on and off, you can kind of smooth. Well, temporal anti-aliasing usually smooths things out on the screen, so this is no difference. It will smooth out this effect as well with an additional smoothing that might work out nicely if you decide to use temporal anti-aliasing, which you don't have to. And okay, another thing is that there's this crate with kind of a different shading than the rocks. It has a shiny metallic shading. The rocks have a more matte shading. Right now there is no mesh blend between them, but with mesh blend, since this is a screen space effect acting on the final colors on the screen, the shading can also be blended kind of nicely between each other. So I just wanted to show with this that different objects intersecting with different shading modes or like shading looks will also blend together quite nicely. So this is it, I think. This mesh blend is actually quite fun to play around with, in my opinion. You can have some pretty interesting results with it. So I hope you try this stuff for yourself and maybe decide that this will be another post process that you kind of hate, or you might actually like it and decide to use it in your game, or just play around with it and create a nice scene with mesh blend enabled. I hope you found this devlog interesting, and you will stay tuned for the next video. Bye.